Welcome back to another episode of Right Here in Mass. Joining me today is Nina Pfister, co-founder of Mag PR. Nina is a creative storyteller who helps VC firms, early stage startups, and other social impact brands refine their messaging, gain targeted top of funnel awareness, and achieve growth via innovative PR programs. Outside of the office, Nina embraces mom mode and enjoys reading, painting, cooking, and golf. In this year, she's set to release her first children's book via Austen Macauley Publishers. Nina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashley. I'm very excited to be here.
And I'm excited to have you here. I feel like it's so funny because, as you can probably relate, like the shoe cobbler's son has no shoes. So it's probably so funny for you to be on the other side of the PR stuff and being the guest this time.
It is, yeah. I'm actually like kind of shy on camera, to be honest, even though I coach others to do this. So I'm putting myself out there for once. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And for listeners tuning in, Nina's full bio is in the show notes. But Nina, why don't you start off by telling us more about yourself and what you do at Mag PR?
Yeah, sure. So you did a beautiful job introducing me. But I started Mag PR back in 2016, really as the antidote to big agency PR culture. Um, I had spent a lot of my career in PR, initially working for IDG Enterprise, where I was helping Fortune 500 tech executives plug into IDG's media realm. There was tons of outlets that they still push out today around tech. And so I was an intermediary for executives that were part of a group through them and helping them get connected to the media space. And then from there, I did go on to work at a larger agency and then eventually moved into sales. And when I became a mom, I really wanted more flexibility. That's kind of same old song and dance. And I did want to create, as I mentioned, a different type of agency. We call it now a boutique agency. And I feel like since 2016, when we got started, now there's so many of us, which is great to see. And I think a testament to that shift that needed to happen in our industry. So we primarily do serve, as you mentioned, venture capital firms, early stage startups, and other social impact brands. That is where we shine.
I love that. And I also really appreciate hearing that you have a sales background too, because I feel like that's probably a really interesting approach that you can take as kind of marrying the sales and PR communications pieces together.
Yeah, for sure. That was definitely helpful in kind of building my first book of business. At that point in time, I was willing to connect with anybody in my network who was looking for help in PR. We had all different types of small businesses primarily that we worked with early on. And as we grew, my sales background did come into play along with my co-founder, Lauren Gills, who has a very deep background in business development as well. As you know, in sales, the more niche you can get, the easier it becomes, I think, versus casting that wider net. So that was kind of a sales tip that we had embraced early on for sure.
Absolutely. And knowing that your sweet spot is really within like the VC tech space, what made you want to really hone in on that and really identify those groups of people as who you would like to serve and support?
Yeah, I think the first part of it is naturally technology isn't going anywhere, right? So it's
Mhm.
a quote unquote safe niche from a growth perspective for us to tap into. The second part of it is honestly our background experience, right? Doing what we're best at and having a passion for startups in particular, given that we are one ourselves still. We're 8 years into this, but we still very much operate like a startup. We love the startup culture in terms of getting in at ground level and really growing together with our clients. The venture capital piece is a little bit newer for us in the last 2 to 3 years. As we plugged into the startup ecosystem, we realized that venture capital firms are also looking for visibility. And there are so many VC firms now out there who are trying to tackle and attract early stage founders in particular. So there's a lot of competition there for them and a great need for PR for them to be able to kind of step into their own brand power and really define, who they are as a firm and what sets them apart.
Definitely. And I'm sure this might be tough for you to pick just one, but I'd love to hear almost like an example of either a tech startup or a VC firm that you've worked with that you've really been able to make incredible impact on, and just hear about your experience with that?
Yeah, I guess I'll pick a more recent client project that we worked on that was really rewarding for us. There was a health tech, there is a health tech startup called Uncovery Care. And it was founded by a woman named Hill Moss, who is actually a cancer survivor. She was a young breast cancer survivor, and she totally pivoted her career and stepped into her power to start this cancer survivorship platform that just, I mean, spoke to me personally, to our whole team, anybody who's been touched by cancer. And just her whole approach to survivorship was like nothing I've ever seen before. And the passion that she brought to the table based on her lived experience was phenomenal to begin with. I knew she was going to be an incredible spokesperson. She had a funding round and a rebrand that she was announcing, and was referred to us by 406 Ventures here in Boston, actually, who is just a referral partner of ours that's really wonderful to work with. And so we were really excited to take on the project, not just because she was really talented as a spokesperson or because they had landed a lot of funding, but primarily because of their mission. And I think that kind of speaks to the opportunity we have as a boutique agency to be a little bit picky about who we support, you know, and get to kind of choose good people, amazing, brilliant people who are creating technology for the greater good. So that's one that we're, you know, just this year really proud of.
I love that. And I can imagine that the excitement and passion behind the startups that you're working with is probably contagious. And it's probably is very exciting to be able to work with them in that space, knowing that they feel so excited for and being able really motivated and whatnot about what's to come.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting trend happening. I don't know if it's necessarily new, but I've just been seeing it a lot in health tech in particular, where founders are emerging from lived experience. And I just think there's something extra powerful about a company that is mission driven and really someone who's identified a problem that they've experienced personally, and being able to craft a solution from scratch. It's definitely motivating for us to get out and help them tell their story.
Right. And it also seems like that would give more credibility to the beneficiaries or whoever would be benefiting from whatever they're building, because they're getting to work closely with and receive some type of product or service from someone who actually gets it, quote unquote, and someone who actually understands what it means and who can help to be there to support whatever problem the users or customers or clients are facing.
Yeah, exactly. Another project we just worked on was with Seven Starling, so a women's health tech company. Same thing, you know, she herself, the founder, what is a mom, and she wanted to create a platform to help expand access for maternal health care for women. So I think I think you're spot on there for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And when a startup is thinking about getting support with PR and they're kind of ready to increase their visibility, I would love to hear a few things that they should kind of be thinking about before they get to that point, or if there's anything that they should have already done before it's time to kick in the PR piece.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Firstly, I think there's a lot of confusion around what PR is, right? So if somebody hasn't worked in marketing in particular before, there's always sort of a question of what defines PR versus kind of traditional marketing. And with you being in social media, I'm sure you see this a lot. You might have clients say, "Hey, can you get me on a podcast? Can you get me into an art news article, et cetera?" And I think there's something to be said for staying in your lane as a marketer to some degree, right? For startups that are thinking about elevating their visibility, I think it's really important to have your baseline messaging nailed down. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it's absolutely allowed to evolve. But I think without that core messaging piece, it's really hard for us to go out and amplify your story, right? So having that story, um, solidified, at least in its first iteration, is the number one thing that we're looking for. So if a founder is unclear about their value proposition, they're not ready for PR. If a founder doesn't have a working site to drive traffic to, they're not ready for PR. I think that with the media landscape right now, we're seeing less, quote unquote, stealth mode, um, and more folks kind of quietly emerging on social, having a fully baked website, getting some customers under their belt who can be a mouthpiece for the brand, and then sort of stepping into more of a formal press launch or press activity after that. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and especially what you mentioned about the website. I mean, 'cause as you alluded to, working in social media, I think a lot of times companies are like, "Well, I have an Instagram account," and it's like, "Well, no, that's just one part of the piece. You can't just launch going off of a social media account. It's so much more important to already have some type of more permanent, established online presence that you fully own and have control over."
Yeah, exactly. And I do think um, approaching media kind of in a tiered approach is helpful. So looking at it like a ladder you're climbing, right? A lot of our early stage B2B startup founders that we work with, they immediately want to jump into TechCrunch, for instance. It's which we would consider that a tier one tech outlet. I think it's really great when founders can look at PR like a journey, not a sprint, and understand that they themselves need practice too, right? So stepping into a tier one media interview can be really nerve wracking. It can induce a lot of rambling and things like that. So it's good to kind of get your feet wet first and maybe do some tier three podcasts or try and do some contributed article content so you get a little bit more practice in that storytelling piece. And then you can be a bit more eloquent once you kind of step up into those tier one opportunities. So I think looking at it as a climb, a longer climb versus just sort of jumping to that top tier is helpful as well.
That's great advice of just being able to kind of dip your toes in the water and get your feet wet so that you are ready for the bigger opportunities and the bigger press features that might be coming through. And I can imagine too that probably getting into those tier three places might help you get noticed by the tier one places. If they see an article or watch an interview or anything like that, I imagine that it can probably just kind of give a heads up to journalists or any other publications that might want to feature that founder or feature that startup in the future.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times we say, the first thing a tier one journalist is going to do is Google a source. They're going to see if you're the real deal, if you know what you're talking about. It's great to have a company brand behind you, but at the end of the day, they're looking at you as an expert source to potentially put into their story that's going to back up what they're writing about. That's what being a source is all about. So the more credibility you can earn, the better your chances are of being selected out of what is usually a very large pool of experts who are trying to be seen and heard in those places.
Definitely. And one thing that I've been thinking about recently, which this question might be geared more towards founders who might be doing their own PR for the time being, but one thing I've been thinking about is how pitching might be affected by more prominent news that might be happening. So, for example, the election is dominating news, and if any tragedies happen that kind of take over a lot of the news, do you recommend that founders kind of pivot their strategy, or it might even depend on the situation if they just kind of keep moving on as normal?
Yeah, I think for mainstream news, which is what you're referring to, right? If there's breaking mainstream news, uh, it's really not worth your time to try and cut through that noise in that moment, especially if there's something super sensitive going on, like a tragedy. But for B2B PR, we're really looking a lot at trade outlets as well. So there are like beyond mainstream news, there are so many other super targeted news outlets that are looking, even in the midst of an election, for new expert sources to comment on things like AI, quantum computing, et cetera, right, in our space in tech. So there is always kind of news to be created if you're looking in the right places.
Yes, that's a great point. And I love that you bring up the trade publications piece too, because that is something that I feel like I've just kind of started to look into and just kind of see that there's also these like industry specific publications and whatnot that founders and startups can look into, which is a really great space for them to be able to potentially get featured and pitched to.
Yeah, and a lot of these trade outlets are unfortunately very understaffed, right? So there's so many budget cuts. A lot of these editors are very hungry for top quality content, and so for startups in particular, like I was talking about earlier, being able to craft your own narrative, contributed articles are a great opportunity to get your name out there as a thought leader, to be able to really tell a story the way you want to. Mind you, these can't be promotional pieces of content. We have to reverse engineer them for media. So you can't go out and say, my platform is the best. You have to come out and talk about the challenges of the market at large and the types of solutions and how, technology is solving those problems without really pointing to your product directly. It's an art, not a science there, but that's a great way for folks who are just getting started in PR to really dip their toe in, I think, and get some placements out of the gate.
Yeah, I love that. And when a company or a startup gets featured, the work doesn't necessarily end there where the piece gets published and that's it. Could you talk more about what they should do and once the piece is live and ensure that they're really getting as much juice ultimately out of it as possible?
Yeah, and that's your expertise, isn't it? I love that. The best thing they can do is hire a social media marketer like yourself. But if they're doing it themselves, obviously repurposing that content into a blog post, for instance, doing a summary of the news that then links through to give a nod to the outlet is highly encouraged. Having, I think I just saw you post about this on LinkedIn, Ashley, having a press room on your site to point to all that coverage, not just for the SEO that comes out of it, but for credibility as well, right? Having somebody drop into your site and see where you've been featured, et cetera, kind of gives you a leg up there. And then not just recycling that content one time, but using it over and over again, making sure you're spreading it out, of course. But there's a lot of ways to peel apart one piece of content that's been published, whether it's using quote boards for social or putting it into an email newsletter. Making sure that you're optimizing that content as much as possible and in a fairly repetitive manner. You don't want to be posting about the same news article every week necessarily, but pointing back to it a couple months later is in our opinion really acceptable and a great use of that work you put in to get that earned media.
Absolutely. And I can imagine that you never know who will see it the second time you share it. It's like there's potentially more eyes that might come across that article or come across whatever piece it is that you've been featured in who might not have seen it the first time. So I think that's great advice is to just find ways to cut it up and repurpose it and share it through different channels.
Yeah, exactly. I think too, thinking about, engagement on social and how you can ask new questions tied to that content, especially pertaining to the current news cycle. So I think that's an interesting way to spark some discussions too online.
Absolutely. And diving further into your entrepreneurial journey specifically, you had mentioned earlier in this podcast that you have a co-founder named Lauren, and I view you two as like the power duo, having built this
That's so
since
nice.
2016.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so nice to hear about such a positive co-founder story. Because I feel like when someone mentions they have a co-founder, sometimes it can be a negative perception, but you two have done incredible work. And I think it's so awesome to just follow along with that. And so with that, I'd love to hear your journey of having a co-founder, of how you and Lauren met and how you kind of tackle the work that both of you do to really create the amazing success that you've had for yourself and your clients.
Yeah, she's awesome, and I'm really glad you asked this question because it feels almost unfair that she's not here beside me. Um, so Lauren and I actually we joke and say we were work wives back in the day at IDG. So we worked together for several years. When I left IDG and moved on to another job, we stayed in touch just on a personal level. She had become a mom around the same time I did, just shortly after. and had kind of shared some of her own woes around inflexibility and wanting to make a change. So I did start the company myself, and I had sort of intended to just be a freelancer out of the gate. And as she and I got to talking about 6 months later, she did decide to join me, and we decided to build, what I'd call a real company at that point. I was able to thankfully build that first book of business that then allowed her to leave. And I knew she had a really great sales background as well, and that all of her amazing attributes that she brings to the table would complement mine. And today, we talk every day. We really kick off every day with a morning rundown. We do have another employee on our team, Crystal Ponte, who's amazing. We have weekly check-ins with her. We're all fully remote. But Lauren and I touch base every morning after school drop-off. It's just our ritual. And it sounds inefficient, but it's not. I think part of it is just keeping each other sane. So for us, that 15-minute rundown of tasks that are all stored in a platform and we can both see them, it's just an accountability measure for us to be able to sit down and say, these are my top priority tasks, these are yours. And that really works well for us so that we can kind of keep tabs on each other and hold each other accountable for what needs to get done on the client side each day.
I love that, especially the whole idea of having the daily check-ins, because I can imagine that things probably change very quickly in PR. So what you thought you might be doing yesterday when you logged off for today might be completely different once you log on in the morning. And so I just love that notion of just having that quick check-in and, like you said, holding each other accountable.
Yeah, it works well for us. And I will say, we have over the years really kind of honed in on our individual strengths. So, I do a lot of our marketing and operations type of non-client work, where Lauren will, pick up some of the client work slack, I would say, not necessarily slack, but just different types of deliverables. So a lot of the times she can manage certain accounts so that I can work on the business where she's more kind of in it on the day to day. But we both do drive all of the strategy. It's very much a team effort. So when we had first started, we divided and conquered accounts. We each would own our own accounts, and we were almost working separately, like in parallel. We thought that was a great way to grow because we could each, keep building our own books of business essentially under the same umbrella. Over time, we realized that was a terrible strategy because God forbid someone wanted to go on vacation and there was a news announcement coming out, or
Mhm.
something along those lines. It was awkward for me to then jump in to her client experience that she had created. And so now we do everything together. Like I said, we have an employee who is our head of creative. So she does a lot of our press release writing, our pitch writing. She's actually a former journalist, Crystal, and she's just so talented. We're
Awesome.
really blessed to have her on our team. She's been with us a couple of years now. So we have a well-oiled machine, and we have pulled on contractors as needed to flex for really large accounts. But for the most part, we do handle everything in-house, which has worked well.
Yes, and I think that's awesome too, especially keeping such a tight-knit and close team. Sometimes I feel like it's easier, like the smaller you are, the easier it is. Sometimes when you get so big, it can feel overwhelming having so many people to manage and people to keep track of.
Yeah, I agree. It was never my goal to have, 100-person agency. It still isn't. I don't really enjoy managing people. I'm not gonna lie. Like, managing people does not come easy to me. I've always been more of an independent worker.
Mhm.
So the idea of managing even 15 people makes me sweat. Like, I find like it's almost like a babysitting job at that point,
Yeah.
and it's not my strength. I can definitely, I have empathy, I can delegate, but the thought of, managing a very large group of people has never been sort of in my wheelhouse. So we stay small on purpose, as I say.
Yeah, I love that. So knowing that the three of you really are kind of all working closely together and having that tight knit, as you say, boutique agency, what would you say is next for Mag PR? Like, what do you have on your goals or exciting things that you're kind of working on the next year or so?
Yeah, so for us, the last year was really hard. 2023 was pretty
Mhm.
awful in the tech space. After Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, a lot of funding froze over. We have VCs in our pocket who told us so, so we kind of knew what was coming. I would say for us, getting back to our regular standard pricing and growing revenue year over year is our top goal. So we're making a slow comeback. We completely understood that this was a bigger than us issue that we really couldn't solve in real time. And so we took on a lot of projects. We held on to the clients that trusted us and knew that things would blow over. But that in 8 years, that was the first time we've faced like an economic challenge.
Mhm.
Thing we were flying really high, frankly, during COVID, and I'm sure you saw this as well on the marketing side, where budgets just shrunk almost overnight. It felt like,
Yeah.
and so that was a big adjustment for us. So for immediate kind of near future goals, next step is to get back to where we were and just keep doing our thing and being mindful of holding on to really excellent clients that we enjoy working with. I think long term, Lauren and I joke, this company, when I started it, it was called Mooring Advisory Group. And over time, it's still Mooring Advisory Group Inc., technically on paper, but we nicknamed ourselves DBA Mag PR to really niche ourselves into PR and make sure that we were able to be found online, et cetera. Um, Lauren and I have talked like maybe in the next 10, 20 years, going back to Mooring Advisory Group and maybe doing angel investing in tech startups
Love that.
and doing, comms consulting. So looking at my future, much older self and wanting to maybe slow down and not do the hustle of media relations. I think that's, kind of a collective dream we have to return to our mooring advisory group roots and go that route.
And such a smart thing to think about too is not only just like the immediate future in the next year, like you mentioned, but thinking about like what's ahead in the next decade or so and thinking about, I don't want to necessarily say like your exit plan, but how you can help to slow things down and do the work because you really want to do it, but not necessarily because you have to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And also just seeing, these founders who are building really fantastic advisory boards. I'm like, I could do that someday, so it's
Totally.
like I gotta earn the title first, which will take another decade at least of years under my belt. But I definitely could see that in our future. Yeah.
I love that. And speaking of what's coming up in your future, as I mentioned in your bio, you are publishing a children's book, and it's been so fun to see how you do that outside of all of your PR work and outside of your business. And so I'd love to give you the opportunity to talk more about that and what inspired you to become an author.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited about this. It has been such a joyful experience for me to do something totally different. As we've talked about, I've been doing PR a long time. I love to write. When I was a little girl, I always wanted to publish a book. I remember getting those white hardcover old school blank books at school, and my parents bought them for me back in the day where I would just write stories. So I've always had a passion for creative writing. I always thought maybe I would do like a fiction novel or something. I know we both share a love of reading, Ashley, and I've always just been a bookworm and I live for the library. Total nerd. But when my grandmother passed away in December, I was inspired to pursue a children's book that would honor our longstanding multi-generational tradition that's called Ravioli Day. It's a Christmas tradition that we have passed down before I was even born. It's been around. So each year, my family, a few weeks before Christmas, we get together, usually at a yacht club locally, because my Italian family is very big now, and so we can't fit into someone's house, which is what we used to do. But we get together in a hall and we make ravioli from scratch. And then the leftover dough we make into homemade pasta that we actually eat that night. All the ravioli gets batched and frozen and sent home to each family to make and bring to their parties or wherever everyone's going, because we can't all get together on Christmas anymore. Again, we're just too big now. There's over 100 people that come to
Oh
this
my
event.
goodness.
Yeah, so there's a lot of us. And so I decided that I would do a Christmas story, really as a tribute to my grandmother and also my own dream to publish a book. And so I wrote a manuscript. I didn't tell anybody because I decided to just do this in my own stealth mode. And I found Austen Macauley Publishers, which is one of the only publishing houses that I at least found in my research that did not require a literary agent.
Mm.
So I just sort of randomly submitted it, to be honest, last January. And then I heard back from them a few weeks later and they gave me a contract and I got started. And I have not done a passion project like this in a very long time, maybe ever. That has, like I said, brought me so much joy and has really just sparked a new creative outlet and allowed me to do something that not only am I really passionate about, but that also kind of honors my family's legacy. So I am very excited. The book is called The Magic of Christmas Ravioli, and it is available now on Amazon and Barnes and Noble online.
I love that. And I think it's so sweet that you took a really well-cherished family tradition and found a way to use your passion for creative writing to turn it into that book. And you brought up a good point about wanting to kind of honor that passion that you've had for writing, which is just kind of the reminder to everyone that it's good to have things that you feel excited about outside of your everyday work. So it's nice to kind of have like that change of pace. And I can imagine that the creativity and ideas that come to you through writing your children's book likely also get fueled into the work that you do with PR. You might find new inspiration or ideas and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, my son is 9.5 now. So he's very much old enough to have walked through this experience with me. And I've kind of dragged him along for every step and showed him what this looks like. And, how do authors envision an illustration and what goes into that. So that's been a lot of fun being able to show him that dreams come true and that it does take hard work and if you want something go out and get it and he's just been so excited about all of this, which has been really fun too.
Oh, that's definitely nice. And with that, how have you been able to balance writing your book and then also having your busy client load with just the juggling of that?
I don't subscribe to balance. I
Yeah.
think that I think that I have found, uh, as still kind of a newer mom, my son's only in the 4th grade, that it's okay to be consumed sometimes by one thing or another. And that means saying no to other things. So, my son just this season, this is his first time playing 2 sports in one season. We always just had him choose one thing. So we didn't overbook ourselves with extracurriculars for his sake as well. We definitely value quality family time. That is a non-negotiable for us. So there are some times where I need to be heads down working, and that sometimes is after dinner. But for the most part, we slot quality time and we prioritize that. And I think for me, there might be weeks where we have a little bit less of that or more, and it all evens out, but just making sure that everyone's on the same page. And my husband's a phenomenal partner. I'm really lucky to have him too. He's very supportive of me and my crazy dreams and everything that I'm always out there chasing and writing and creating. And I think that's been, a really important piece of my puzzle is having a supportive partner as well who can pick up my slack and vice versa during those busy seasons. So,
Yes, and you bring up a great point about the whole idea of seasons where throughout the year and throughout life, I mean, there might be some hustle seasons and then there might be some slower seasons. And so exactly as you mentioned, that 50-50 balance isn't really achievable. And it's just important to note that there will be those ups and downs. And so I love that you had mentioned that because I think it's so important to remember and to not feel forced into having that perfect balance because it might not happen and that's okay.
Yeah, yes, couldn't agree more. I think, there's a difference between hustling and burning out too, right? And I've
Mhm.
learned that lesson before. So I think just knowing your own boundaries and knowing what you need. I know I'm a morning person, so I'm not going to be burning the midnight oil because, my brain literally can't take it. So I need to veg out at night. And so I will shut things down fairly early unless I'm on deadline and I have to get something done. But otherwise, I'm not burning the candle at both ends. I think, for me, a quiet Saturday morning, if my son's watching a show and my husband's catching up on work or mowing the lawn, those are the times where I would sit down and work on my book for an hour. So it's just, I think about time management too. And that's something that I feel like I have kind of mastered over the last few years is finding those little slots of time and maximizing them. And for me, for the book, it was fun. So
Mhm.
it felt a lot different than sitting down and trying to write a press release.
Right.
Um, this was a very much different type of hustle, if that makes sense. I was so eager to get back to it. And so yeah, so that was a little different than, balancing a side hustle or something like that. That would have felt maybe a little bit more stressful.
Absolutely. Nina, as we get close to the end of this episode, one of my favorite questions to ask our guests is what their favorite local businesses are to support. And so I'm super excited to hear what you will say for your places, knowing that you grew up on the South Shore and still live there today.
Yeah, so I will say my favorite local restaurant is and probably always will be Tosca in Hingham. It is an amazing Italian restaurant, and I actually worked there as a kid. I was a hostess there. We've had so many family holidays there, um, from births and baptisms to funeral after parties and things of that nature. So I've spent a lot of time there, but I definitely recommend that one. I also just really encourage everyone to support their local libraries. The libraries need us, and I actually sit on a nonprofit board for the Weymouth Libraries Foundation. I live in Weymouth, Mass, here on the South Shore, and we're just trying to raise some funding that is very desperately needed to keep our libraries open and maintained, and keep the community engaged. So everyone go get your library card and use them because they're free. And I just think they're a nice resource really for a whole family to experience.
Absolutely. I love that. Nina, this has been such an awesome opportunity for me to have you on the show, and I really appreciate you coming on today. And now I would love to give you the opportunity to share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect with you further.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm most active on social on LinkedIn, so just at Nina Pfister, I believe. Mag PR, our website is mooringadvisorygroup.com. So those would be the two best places to find me. For anything related to my children's book, I'm at ninapfister.com. So you can find all the information about the book there. But thank you so much for having me. This was really fun and a lot less scary than I thought it would be.
I'm glad that you said yes. And I will link to all of your places in the show notes that way our listeners can click through and see all of the exciting things that you're doing. But thank you so much again for coming on today, Nina.
Thanks, Ashley. I'll talk to you soon.